Hey there. Today we're going to be reading Funny in Farsi, chapter 18. I ran and I ran and I ran. So that's a play on words, of course. Iran or Iran, as many Americans call it, and also her running away. And in this one, Firuz's family discovers the unpopularity of the Shah. Now, I put a little link here that for it might be an activity used later, but it's a very interesting video about a party that the Shah threw in the desert. And it really changed people's opinion about him or turned his people against him. It's one of the many things, but this one seemed to symbolize everything that was wrong with the Shah. All right, a few words that you may or may not be accustomed to. Okay, one is unaccustomed, and that means not familiar or usual. I put somebody new using chopsticks, kind of in a funny way, maybe because he's unaccustomed to using chopsticks. Colleagues, that's a person with whom one works in a profession or business. And here we go. So, in 1977, the Shah and his wife were scheduled to come to America to meet the newly elected president, Jimmy Carter. Very few Iranians lived in America then, and those of us who did were invited to go to Washington, D.C. to welcome the Shah. The Iranian government would cover all expenses. My father accepted the invitation. My brothers reacted with a few choice words. "Are you absolutely crazy? Haven't you heard about the anti-Shah demonstrators? You will definitely get beat up. Don't go." My brothers clearly did not understand the lure of the phrase all expense paid trip. A few weeks later, drinking fresh squeezed orange juice in our first class seats, my parents and I looked forward to our first visit to the nation's capital. During our 3-night stay, we were supposed to show up at 2 events welcoming the Shah. The rest of the time was on our own. My father had promised to take me to at least one museum. My mother looked forward to seeing the famous sights. We arrived at our hotel to find the lobby full of Iranians. Unaccustomed to seeing so many of our fellow countrymen in one place, my parents started mingling feverishly, discovering friends of friends and long-forgotten colleagues. As we went to find our room, we felt like a bunch of kids on a field trip. A fruit basket would have been nice, but instead we found a flyer had been slipped under the door. So, who was president of the United States in 1977? What major world leader was coming to visit? Why did her brothers not want the family to accept the invitation to welcome the Shah? And what were some things the family wanted to do in Washington, D.C.? Brainwashed, most people know what that is, right? It means to make someone adopt radically different beliefs by forcible pressure. They kind of force you to believe something, and you're kind of tortured into believing whatever it is they want you to believe. And to denounce is to publicly declare that someone or something is wrong or evil, to condemn. So this is the note they found, the flyer they found in their hotel room. "Dear brainwashed cowards, you are nothing but puppets of the corrupt Shah. We will teach you a lesson you will never forget. Death to the Shah! Death to you!" My father crumpled the flyer and threw it away. "Let's find out where they're having the dinner buffet," he said. The next day, half a dozen buses lined up in front of our hotel to take us to the lawn across from the White House. We were given Iranian flags and told to wave them at the Shah's arrival. Moments before we left, a man boarded our bus and introduced himself as a lawyer working for the Iranian government. "In case anyone attacks you," he says, "please try to take his picture. It will be most useful." We arrived at the White House to find a group of masked demonstrators carrying signs denouncing the Shah and his government. "Don't worry," my father assured me. "They're on the other side of the street." Opposite the demonstrators, scaffolding had been built for the Shah's supporters. Speakers took turns giving speeches on the glories of Iran. To my delight, I found the lawn had been strewn with miniature Iranian flags. "Help me find 30 of them," I asked my parents. "I'm going to hand them out in Mrs. Crockett's social studies class." So what was more important than a death threat to Farouza's dad? And what did the Iranian government lawyer tell them to do if they got attacked? Why did Farouza want to What did Farouza want to collect for her social studies class? All right. My mother and I headed toward the back of the lawn while my father went to the front to look for more flags. A few minutes later, we heard my father say, "Look how many I found!" He held up his bounty, but his voice was drowned out by the 21-gun salute announcing the arrival of the Shah's limousine. People started to cheer, but the cheering wasn't entirely cheerful. The demonstrators had crossed the road. They were stampeding toward us, waving sticks with nails driven into them. People were screaming and running. Instead of Iranian flags, the lawn was suddenly covered with bloody and injured Iranians. My parents and I ran and ran and ran. We found an empty bus, and not caring about its destination, climbed on board. "I'm sorry, folks," the bus driver drawled. "Y'all are gonna have to get off this bus, 'cause it's out of service and I'm on break." Across the street, we found a police officer on horseback. "Excuse me," I said. "We're afraid we're going to get beaten up. Could you please help us get back to our hotel?" Perhaps this officer had joined the police force because of the handsome uniforms, or because he wanted a job that let him ride a horse. He looked at us and said, "Sorry, that's not my job." Spotting another bus, we boarded it immediately. "Do you have tickets?" the driver asked. "Well, how much are they?" We paid $21 and took our seats just as the bus started to leave. We had no idea where we were going. A recorded narration began. "Our next stop is the Lincoln Memorial, built in honor of Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States. On the north wall of this majestic memorial, you will see the words of the Gettysburg Address. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth." How was the welcome for the Shah spoiled? Why were they not allowed to board the bus? And how helpful was the police officer? What kind of bus did the family end up taking to escape? 3 hours, 4 monuments, and one cab ride later, we arrived at our hotel. The lobby was filled with bandaged survivors exchanging horror stories. At the sight of the wounded, my father turned to my mother and me and said, "Don't mention we went on a tour. It's going to look bad that we were having fun while everyone else was suffering." Before I could tell my father that the tour had not been fun, he was accosted by a friend whose arm was now in a sling. "Where have you been the whole time? We were getting ready to call the hospitals." "Well," my father said, "we had to walk back." Like a story written in installments, a second flyer awaited us in our room. "Dear brainwashed cowards, we are going to blow you up." Even the prospect of the dinner buffet was no longer enough to keep us in the nation's capital. "That's it," my father announced. "We're leaving." 6 hours later, we found ourselves in the coach section of a crowded airplane, sitting in 3 different rows. We were thrilled to be headed back home. As the airplane took off, my father turned around and shouted from 4 rows ahead of me, "That really wasn't that bad. Farouza, you know how you like historical places? Well, we saw a bunch." He continues, "Of course, I do have one regret." "What's that?" I yelled back. "I shouldn't have dropped all the flags. I'm sure I had enough for your whole class." "That's okay," I replied. "We can always go back." So what was embarrassing to the family when they got back to the hotel? And what made Farouza's dad decide it was time to leave DC? And what was one good thing about the trip, according to Farouza's father? All right, well, thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next installment of Funny in Farsi.